The clinking of silverware on porcelain was the only sound that dared to break the tension. It was Sunday dinner, a ritual my mother-in-law, Diana, insisted upon, and it always felt less like a family gathering and more like a weekly performance review where I was consistently failing. The roast chicken I'd spent all afternoon perfecting sat between us, its golden skin gleaming under the dining room chandelier, but I couldn't bring myself to take a bite. My stomach was a tight knot of dread. Across the table, Diana dabbed her lips with a linen napkin, her movements precise and critical, as if she were inspecting the very fabric of my existence. My husband Ethan sat beside me, his hand resting on his wineglass, a silent spectator in a war he refused to acknowledge. For weeks, the air in our home had been thick with unspoken things, with the weight of our shared secret, a secret Diana had somehow sniffed out and was now using as a weapon. "You know, darling," Diana began, her voice a smooth, venomous purr, "I saw the most adorable baby boutique downtown today. Little tiny shoes, embroidered onesies. It's a shame, really." She let the words hang in the air, a perfectly aimed dart. I kept my eyes fixed on my plate, my knuckles white as I gripped my fork. Ethan shifted uncomfortably in his chair, but said nothing. That was his role. The neutral party, the man caught between the woman he married and the woman who raised him, a position that was becoming increasingly untenable. "A family needs children to feel complete, don't you think, Ethan?" she pressed, turning her sharp gaze on him. He cleared his throat, avoiding my eyes. Mom, let's not." "Oh, I'm just making an observation," she said, with a dismissive wave of her hand. "Some women are just not built for it. They focus on their little careers, their hobbies. They play house, but they can't build a home." The insult was so direct, so exquisitely cruel, that it stole the air from my lungs. I had been a senior graphic designer for 7 years, a job I loved, a job that had paid for the down payment on this very house. But in her eyes, it was a frivolous distraction. I could feel the tears stinging my eyes, but I refused to give her the satisfaction. I took a slow, deliberate sip of water, my hand trembling slightly. Ethan finally looked at me, a flicker of something, pity, guilt, in his eyes. "Rachel is a wonderful wife," he said, his voice quiet but firm. Diana let out a laugh that sounded like shattering glass. "Oh, I'm sure she is. But a wife is supposed to be a mother. That's the legacy. That's what matters." She leaned forward, her smile turning into a predatory smirk as she looked directly at me. "Which is why I have to be honest. I'm so glad Ethan has finally seen the light." My head snapped up. What was she talking about? I looked at Ethan, my heart beginning to hammer against my ribs. He wouldn't meet my gaze. His face was pale, his jaw tight. "It's for the best, dear," Diana continued, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "You're a lovely girl, but you're an empty vessel. My son is leaving you for a real woman, one who can give him a family." The room went silent. The words echoed in my head, each one a separate agonizing blow. I turned to Ethan, my voice a choked whisper. "Ethan, what is she saying?" All eyes were on him, waiting for the final, devastating confirmation. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. In that moment, the last 5 years of my life flashed before my eyes. A montage of sterile doctor's offices, hushed consultations, and the quiet, creeping despair that had settled into the corners of our marriage. It started with hope, with us holding hands in a sunlit waiting room, laughing nervously as we filled out forms. We were young, in love, and ready. But month after month, the single line on the pregnancy tests became a symbol of our failure. My failure, as Diana so often reminded me. We went through it all. The blood tests, the hormone panels, the invasive examinations. The doctors were kind but clinical, their words a blur of medical jargon that all boiled down to the same frustrating conclusion: unexplained infertility. That diagnosis was a curse. It meant there was no clear reason, no one to blame, which in Diana's world meant the blame fell squarely on me. "Maybe you're just too stressed from your job," she'd say, her tone laced with implication. A woman's body knows when she's not ready to be a mother. Ethan tried to defend me at first. He'd wrap his arm around me after her visits, whispering, "Don't listen to her. We're in this together." But her words were like acid, slowly eating away at the foundation of our partnership. He started to pull away, the easy intimacy we once shared replaced by a quiet, shared grief that we no longer knew how to navigate. The bedroom became a place of scheduled attempts and profound disappointment. Our conversations, once filled with dreams of the future, now carefully tiptoed around the one thing we both wanted and couldn't have. I remember one night, about a year ago, I found him staring out the living room window, his shoulders slumped in defeat. "Maybe she's right," he'd said, his voice barely audible. "Maybe there's something wrong with you that they just can't find." I felt a part of me break that night. It wasn't that he was being malicious. It was that he was exhausted, worn down by his mother's relentless poisoning of our well. He had started to believe her narrative, that he was perfect and I was broken. I had suggested he get tested too, just to be thorough, but he had refused. "There's nothing wrong with me, Rachel," he had said, a rare flash of anger in his eyes. "The men in my family are potent." It was a line straight from his mother's playbook. And now, sitting at this dinner table, with Diana's triumphant declaration hanging in the air, I felt the full weight of that history crash down on me. She had won. She had successfully painted me as the barren wife, the flawed woman holding her perfect son back. I looked at Ethan, pleading with my eyes for him to say something, anything, to deny it, to tell his mother she was wrong, that he still loved me, that we were still a team. His silence was his answer. It was a confirmation of every fear I'd harbored, every insecurity Diana had so carefully cultivated. He was going to leave me. He was choosing his mother's version of the future over the one we had tried and failed to build together. The chicken grew cold. The candles flickered, casting long, dancing shadows on the walls. My world was shrinking to this single, excruciating moment, waiting for the axe to fall. My breath caught in my throat, a strangled, silent gasp. I watched Ethan, my husband, the man I had loved through 5 years of quiet heartbreak, and waited for him to deliver the final blow. I expected him to nod, to agree with his mother, to gently explain that it was over. I braced myself for the rehearsed speech, the kind and sorrowful lies that people tell when they are shattering someone's world. Diana leaned back in her chair, a smug, victorious smile playing on her lips. She had him. She had finally broken us. But that's not what happened. Ethan didn't look at me. He didn't look at his mother. He looked at a point on the far wall, his expression unreadable. He slowly, deliberately, placed his napkin on the table. Then he pushed his chair back, the sound of its legs scraping against the hardwood floor echoing in the dead silence of the room. He stood up. He wasn't angry. He wasn't sad. He was calm, terrifyingly calm. "Ethan, darling, sit down. Let's not make a scene," Diana cooed. But her smile had lost its edge. A flicker of uncertainty had entered her eyes. Ethan ignored her. He reached into the inner pocket of his suit jacket, the one he only wore for special occasions, and pulled out a single folded piece of paper. It was thick, professional, the kind of paper that carried weight. "What's that?" Diana asked, her voice a little sharper now. "Divorce papers? Good. Get it over with." She waved a dismissive hand, trying to reclaim control of the moment. But Ethan just shook his head slowly. Without a word, he walked to the head of the table, where his mother sat, and placed the folded document directly in front of her plate, next to the half-eaten slice of chicken. The paper lay there, stark white against the dark wood of the table. I think you should read this, Mom," he said, and his voice was flat, devoid of all emotion. It was the voice of a man who had crossed a line and had no intention of ever going back. Diana hesitated, her eyes darting from Ethan's face to the paper. She picked it up with a theatrical sigh, as if this was just another one of my pathetic attempts to win sympathy. She unfolded it, her eyes scanning the first few lines, and then she froze. The smugness evaporated, the color drained from her face, leaving her skin a pasty, mottled gray. Her perfectly manicured hand began to tremble, and the paper shook with it. She looked up at Ethan, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. but no sound came out. I couldn't see what was written, but I saw its effect. I saw the instant, catastrophic dismantling of her entire worldview. Ethan finally turned to me, and for the first time that night, his eyes met mine. They were filled with a sorrow so deep it made my own heart ache. "It was never you, Rachel," he whispered, his voice cracking with a pain I now realized he had been carrying alone for years. "It was always me." He tapped the document his mother was still staring at in horror. "It's a medical report. I'm sterile." The room fell into a deathly silence, a vacuum where all the lies and accusations had been sucked out, leaving only the cold, irrefutable truth. The silence that followed Ethan's confession was absolute. It was a physical presence in the room, pressing down on us, heavy and unbreakable. For a moment, no one moved, no one breathed. Diana stared at the paper in her hand, her face a mask of disbelief. The words, "case dismissed," from a courtroom drama, couldn't have been more final than the look on her face. Her perfect son, her legacy, her vision of a dynasty built on his name, it all crumbled to dust in that single devastating instant. Then the denial came, fierce and desperate. "This is a lie," she hissed, her voice a ragged whisper. She slammed the paper down on the table. "This is one of your tricks, Rachel. You forged this. You paid some quack doctor to write this filth to save your pathetic marriage." She pointed a trembling finger at me, her eyes wild with a frantic need to find a familiar villain. I was so stunned I couldn't even speak. I just stared back at her, my mind reeling from the whiplash of the last 5 minutes. I had gone from being the broken one to the accused conspirator without taking a single breath. But this time, Ethan didn't let me stand alone. He stepped forward, placing himself between me and his mother, a human shield against her venom. "Stop it, Mom," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "Just stop." Rachel didn't know. "I never told her." "You're lying to protect her," Diana shrieked, her composure completely shattered. "She's manipulated you. She's weak, and she's made you weak too." "No," Ethan said, his voice cutting through her tirade like a surgeon's scalpel. "I kept it from her to protect her from you." He gestured around the dining room, at the perfect table, the perfect meal, the perfect little hell she had created. "I kept it a secret because I knew exactly what you would do. I knew you would turn it into this, into a spectacle of your own disappointment. I knew you would blame her, mock her, and try to tear us apart because you can't stand the thought of me being anything less than the perfect image you've built in your head." Every word was a hammer blow, dismantling the facade Diana had spent every word was lifetime constructing. He wasn't just defending me. He was finally, after all these years, defining himself outside of her shadow. "I went to a specialist 6 months ago," he continued, his gaze unwavering. "Alone. I wanted to be sure before I said anything. The diagnosis is azoospermia. It's irreversible. There are no sperm, none. It's not Rachel's stress. It's not her career. It's not her fault. It's my body. It's me." Diana sank back into her chair, the fight draining out of her. The fury was replaced by a hollow, vacant look. She looked at Ethan as if he were a stranger, a ghost who had taken her son's place. "All those years," she murmured, more to herself than to anyone else. "All that time, I thought—" She couldn't finish the sentence. She couldn't admit she had been wrong, that her cruelty had been based on a complete and utter fiction. Ethan took a deep breath, the sound shuddering in the quiet room. He reached for my hand, his fingers lacing with mine. His touch was warm, steady, and for the first time in a long time, it felt like an anchor. "Let's go home, Rachel," he said softly. I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. As we turned to leave, I glanced back at Diana one last time. She was still sitting there, staring at the medical report on the table, a lonely queen deposed from her throne of lies, with nothing left but the cold, bitter taste of the truth. The drive home was wrapped in a new kind of silence. It wasn't the tense, brittle silence of unspoken resentments that had filled our car for the past year. This was a heavy, contemplative quiet, the kind that follows a storm after it has ripped through and torn everything down to its foundations. The world outside the windows was a blur of streetlights and passing headlights, I stared out at the city lights of Portland, but I wasn't really seeing them. I was replaying the scene at the dinner table over and over, trying to align the man who had just defended me so fiercely with the man who had let me carry the burden of our infertility alone for so long. Ethan kept both hands on the steering wheel, his knuckles still white. He didn't try to fill the silence with apologies or explanations, and I was grateful for that. I needed a moment to just breathe, to let the truth settle into my bones. The secret was out, but its reveal had left a landscape of new, complicated emotions in its wake. There was relief, of course, a profound, gut-wrenching relief that the blame I had internalized for so long wasn't mine to bear. But there was also a sliver of betrayal. He had known for 6 months. 6 months of me going to bed at night, feeling like a failure. 6 months of his mother's escalating cruelty. He had watched me suffer, and he had said nothing. When we pulled into our driveway, he turned off the engine, but didn't make a move to get out. He finally turned to me, his face illuminated by the soft glow of the dashboard lights. His eyes were filled with an apology that words couldn't yet articulate. "I should have told you," he said, his voice raspy. "The moment I found out, I should have come straight to you." I just nodded, still processing. "Why didn't you?" I asked, my own voice barely a whisper. He let out a long, shaky breath. "Because I was a coward," he admitted, and the honesty of it was disarming. "And because I was ashamed. My whole life, my mom, she drilled it into my head that a man's worth is tied to his ability to carry on the family name. When that doctor told me, it felt like my whole identity just collapsed. And I knew what she would do to you if she found out. I thought if I kept it quiet, I could protect you from her. I thought I could handle her on my own." He ran a hand over his face, his exhaustion palpable. "But I was wrong. I didn't protect you. I just made you the target. I let you take all the hits while I hid behind my own shame. Tonight, when she said that, about me leaving you for a real woman, I couldn't do it anymore. When she said that, I couldn't let you believe for one more second that you were the problem. It was never you, Rachel. Not for a single moment." Tears. I didn't know I was holding back began to slide down my cheeks. They weren't tears of sadness, but of release. For the first time, we weren't talking about infertility. We were talking about us, about his fear and my pain, about the walls we had let build up between us. I reached across the console and placed my hand on his. "We're home," I said softly. It was a statement, but it felt like a question too. Were we? Could this place, haunted by so much quiet sorrow, ever feel like home again? He squeezed my hand, a silent promise in the darkness. "We'll figure it out," he whispered. "Together. For real this time." And as we walked into our house that night, the silence that greeted us felt different. It wasn't empty anymore. It was just quiet, waiting for us to decide what to build next. The weeks that followed the disastrous Sunday dinner were a period of careful, deliberate reconstruction. The secret, once a toxic presence that had poisoned the air between us, was now out in the open, and its absence left a space we had to learn how to fill. We started talking, really talking, for the first time in years. We didn't just talk about the diagnosis. We talked about everything it had unearthed. The years of his mother's emotional manipulation, my feelings of failure, his quiet shame, and the deep-seated pressures we had both buckled under. It wasn't easy. There were nights filled with tears and painful admissions, moments where the sheer weight of what we had lost felt overwhelming. But for every difficult conversation, there was a moment of connection, a rediscovery of the partnership we'd almost let die. One of the first things we did was reclaim our space. The guest room, the one Diana had claimed as her own during her extended stays, had always felt like an embassy of her judgment within our home. One Saturday, without a word, Ethan and I went in and started packing her things into boxes. We took down the severe, joyless landscape paintings she had hung and boxed up the potpourri that always made me sneeze. As we worked, a sense of lightness began to fill the room. When it was empty, we stood in the middle of the bare space, and I had an idea. "Let's make this our room," I said. A place for us. He looked at me, a slow smile spreading across his face. What kind of room? He asked. An art studio, I said without hesitation. A place to make things. A place to be creative, not destructive. That weekend, we painted the walls a warm, sunny yellow. We bought a large drafting table for my design work and an easel for Ethan, who had loved to paint in college but had given it up years ago. We filled the shelves with books, art supplies, and plants. The room transformed from a shrine to his mother's disapproval into a sanctuary of our shared future. It was a symbolic act, but it was a powerful one. We were no longer defining our lives by what we couldn't have. We were defining it by what we could create together. Our conversations about family shifted too. The desperate, painful weight of trying to conceive was gone. In its place was a new, gentler sense of possibility. We started researching adoption, not as a second-best option, but as a path we could choose intentionally on our own terms. We went to information sessions, read books, and talked to other couples who had adopted. The focus was no longer on biology, but on love, on our capacity to provide a home for a child who needed one. Ethan blossomed in this new, honest environment. Freed from the pressure of his mother's expectations, he became the man I had first fallen in love with. Kind, attentive, and funny. He started standing up straighter. His laughter came more easily, and he began to look at me with an admiration that had been clouded by guilt for too long. He was finally learning to separate his identity from his diagnosis. We were healing, not just as a couple, but as individuals. We were two broken pieces that, instead of trying to fit back into an old, shattered vase, were rearranging ourselves into a new mosaic, stronger and more beautiful for the cracks. The house began to feel like ours again, filled not with the ghosts of what might have been, but with the vibrant, hopeful promise of what was yet to come. The peace we had so carefully cultivated was inevitably tested. About 2 months after the reveal, on a quiet Tuesday evening, the doorbell rang. Ethan and I exchanged a look. We weren't expecting anyone. My heart gave a little lurch of apprehension as Ethan went to the door. I heard the lock click, and then his voice, tight and controlled. "What are you doing here, Mom?" I stood up from the couch, my hands suddenly clammy. I walked to the hallway and saw her standing on our doorstep. Diana. She was dressed in a soft beige suit, her hair perfectly coiffed, a picture of remorseful elegance. She was holding a peace offering, a ridiculously expensive-looking orchid plant. "Ethan, darling, I just wanted to talk," she said, her voice trembling with practiced fragility. "I haven't been able to sleep. I've been so worried about you, about both of you." Ethan didn't move. He stood firm, blocking the doorway. "There's nothing to talk about. We said everything that needed to be said." "Please," she pleaded, her eyes welling up with tears that I knew were as manufactured as her concern. "Let me just apologize. Rachel, I am so sorry." She looked past Ethan, her gaze landing on me. "I was wrong. I was cruel. I just love my son so much, and I was blinded by my desire for grandchildren. Can you ever forgive me?" The old me, the Rachel who craved her approval, would have melted. I would have invited her in, accepted the orchid, and let the cycle of abuse begin all over again. But I wasn't that person anymore. I saw the apology for what it was, a Trojan horse. It wasn't about her remorse. It was about regaining entry, reestablishing her influence. I walked to the door and stood beside Ethan, our shoulders almost touching. We were a united front. "We appreciate the sentiment, Diana," I said, my voice calm and steady, a voice I didn't know I possessed until that moment. "But we need space, a lot of it." Her expression flickered. The mask of contrition slipped, revealing the familiar glint of frustration. "But I'm your mother," she said, her voice hardening as she turned back to Ethan. "You can't just cut me out of your life. Family doesn't do that." "Family doesn't do what you did, Mom," Ethan replied, his voice unwavering. "Family doesn't spend years emotionally tormenting their daughter-in-law. Family doesn't base their love on a person's ability to procreate. You weren't trying to help our family. You were trying to destroy it to fit your own narrative." The orchid trembled in her hands. She had lost control, and she knew it. In a last desperate attempt, she tried one more time, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "It's still her, isn't it? She's the one turning you against me." That was it. That was the moment I knew there was no hope for her. I stepped forward. "No, Diana," I said, looking her directly in the eye. "It's you. It was always you. We are building a life here, one based on honesty and respect, and there is no room for your toxicity in it." Ethan reached for the door. "Goodbye, Mom," he said softly, but with an air of finality that was absolute. He began to close the door. "You'll regret this," she shrieked, her voice finally cracking into raw, ugly rage. "You'll come crawling back." The door clicked shut, muffling her final words. Ethan and I stood there in the entryway, the sound of our breathing the only noise in the house. He leaned his forehead against the cool wood of the door for a moment, then turned to me. "Are you okay?" he asked. I looked at him, at the man who had finally chosen me, chosen us, and I smiled. A real, genuine smile. "I've never been better," I said. And I meant it. Months turned into a year, and the silence from Diana became a comfortable, background hum rather than a threatening void. From Diana, life settled into a new rhythm, one defined not by what was missing, but by what we were actively building. The art studio became our favorite room in the house, a space filled with the smell of paint and turpentine, the floor splattered with color. Ethan's canvases were bold and abstract, full of the emotion he had suppressed for so long. My design work flourished, fueled by a newfound confidence. We were creating, not just art, but a new life, a new story for ourselves. We continued with the adoption process, moving through the paperwork and home studies with a sense of shared purpose that was both exhilarating and grounding. It wasn't a desperate scramble to fill a void anymore. It was a calm, intentional journey toward expanding our family on our own terms. We learned that a family isn't something you are born into by default. It's something you build with love, trust, and a hell of a lot of work. Our home, once a place of quiet tension, was now filled with laughter. We hosted dinner parties with friends, friends who loved us for who we were, not for what we could provide. We argued about what to name the dog we planned to get, and debated the merits of a vacation to the coast versus the mountains. They were the normal, wonderful, mundane arguments of a happy couple. One crisp autumn afternoon, as we were raking leaves in the front yard, a car I didn't recognize pulled up to the curb. A woman got out and approached us hesitantly. It was Ethan's cousin, Sarah, someone we hadn't seen since before the fallout with Diana. "I hope this is okay," she said, wringing her hands nervously. I heard what happened, and I wanted to say I'm so sorry for what she put you through. Both of you." She told us that Diana had tried to spin the story to the rest of the family, painting herself as the heartbroken victim of a cruel son and a manipulative daughter-in-law. But the truth, Sarah said, had a way of coming out. People had started to see the pattern, the years of her subtle digs and not so subtle control. "You did the right thing," Sarah said, looking at us with genuine admiration. "You chose each other. That's all that matters." Her visit was a small thing, but it felt monumental. It was validation that we weren't the villains in our own story. That night, Ethan and I sat on the porch, wrapped in blankets, sipping hot cider. The air was cool and clean. "Do you ever regret it?" I asked softly. "Telling them? Cutting her off?" He looked out at the street, at the orange and yellow leaves scattered across the lawn. "I regret waiting so long," he said without hesitation. "I regret every day I let her poison our life. I regret every time you felt alone in this. But I don't regret the truth. The truth set us free." He turned to me, his eyes clear and steady. "Our family starts here, Rachel, with you and me. Anything else is just noise." I leaned my head on his shoulder, closing my eyes. He was right. We had faced the ugliest parts of ourselves and each other, and had come out on the other side, not unscathed, but whole. The foundation was no longer cracked. It was forged in the fire of a difficult truth. And I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my soul, that whatever we built on it from now on would be unbreakable. We were finally, truly, home.